The 50th floor of the glass tower glowed brightly. The air was thick, as if a single spark could set off an explosion. Charles Harrington, the silver-haired and powerful CEO of Harrington Global, had just received terrible news. The Middle East advisor, the one holding the key to a $300 million deal, had been in an accident and was rushed to the hospital. The entire boardroom went dead silent. The clock on the wall ticked second by second. The partners from Arabia had already arrived. They would walk in exactly 20 minutes from now. Charles slammed the table, his voice low and grating. 30 years of my career, all going down the drain just because none of us understands Arab culture. The senior directors turned pale. No one dared say a word. Panic spread like an invisible wave through the room. And then, from the corner, a voice spoke up, quiet, but just sharp enough to cut through the silence. "Excuse me, I lived in Qatar for 6 years. I studied the art of Islamic negotiation. Maybe I can help." Every pair of eyes turned instantly. The one who had spoken was not a director, not a consultant, but Darius Brown, the document courier. The room stared, half in disbelief, half in mockery, and for a split second, it felt like there was only one question hanging in the air. What could a delivery guy possibly do? His name was Darius Brown, 29 years old. To many in the company, he was just the black delivery guy who ran around every day with a stack of folders in his hand. But few knew that just a few years ago, Darius had been a promising academic. He had received a full scholarship in international economics in the United Kingdom, focusing his research on Middle Eastern trade. His writings on Islamic negotiation culture had been published in academic journals, and some professors had even suggested turning his work into a book. But life does not follow a straight path. When his father passed away suddenly and his mother became gravely ill, the treatment costs exceeded anything he could afford. Darius had to set aside his thesis and return to the United States. His graduate degree remained unfinished, and his academic dreams were put on hold. He took on every job to make ends meet: warehouse labor, kitchen assistant, and eventually, a courier for Harrington Global. A humble job, just enough to live day by day. Inside the company, Darius was nearly invisible. Every time he walked into a room, most people would nod indifferently, or just call him the delivery guy. Some would even scoff. This kind of guy is better at carrying boxes than talking million-dollar business. The cruelest of them all was Victoria Blake, sharp, cold, and the CEO's right hand. To Darius, she never once looked directly at him, only threw out cutting remarks. There was a time when he quietly placed a stack of documents on her desk. Victoria whispered to a colleague, "He does not belong here. The delivery guy will always just be a delivery guy." But what no one knew was that in those 3 quiet, unnoticed years, Darius had been observing everything, every tense negotiation, every bargaining tactic, even the dark corners within the company. He remembered every detail, as if he were writing a book, just one that had not been published yet. And today, maybe this was the moment when life forced him to turn that unfinished page. Charles remained silent, eyes narrowing at Darius. He could not believe that a courier could possibly shift the course of a $300 million deal. But in this high-stakes moment, Charles had no choice but to throw a lifeline, no matter how thin it was. "If you really know, then prove it." Darius took a deep breath. He stepped forward without a hint of hesitation and began to speak in flawless Arabic, flown like an ancient melody. He opened with the traditional greeting that any Middle Easterner would recognize as a symbol of deep respect. The atmosphere in the room changed. The American executives stared wide-eyed, and Charles froze in place. None of them had ever heard anyone in the company speak Arabic that smoothly, not even the expensive outside consultants. Darius continued, this time in English, his voice warm and steady. "Mr. Charles, our partners value proper etiquette. A handshake must last just the right amount of time, not too firm, not too soft. When offering tea, the guest's cup should always be filled 3/4 full, never to the brim. And as for seating, the chair near the window is reserved for the head of the delegation, while the seat opposite signifies equal standing." Every detail he mentioned was so precise it left everyone in the room stunned. Charles crossed his arms, his expression a mix of frustration and hope. Finally, He gave a subtle nod. "All right, you will join the meeting as a temporary advisor." Just then, the door opened. The Middle Eastern delegation entered, dressed in immaculate white robes, their eyes sharp and unreadable. Charles gave a brief introduction, and Darius, with a respectful bow and the proper greeting, earned a rare smile from the delegation leader. The negotiation began smoothly. The partners nodded along, exchanging looks of trust and appreciation with Darius. Everything seemed to be falling into place in an instant, but at the end of the table, Victoria sat silently. Her eyes glinted with quiet resentment. To her, having the delivery guy seated alongside the executive team was an insult, and she vowed not to let it last much longer. The meeting was going smoother than anyone could have hoped. Figures were being discussed, terms were laid out, all in a friendly atmosphere. Each time Darius translated a phrase or added a cultural nuance, the Middle Eastern guests nodded with approval, and those rare smiles started appearing more frequently. Charles began to breathe easier, seeing a light flickering at the end of the tunnel. But just as trust was being built, a cold voice cut through the room like a blade. "Mr. Charles," Victoria Blake leaned toward the guests, offering a thin smile. "Perhaps you should know the truth. The advisor sitting beside us here is, in fact, just a delivery employee." "That is right, a guy who delivers documents around the company. How touching that Harrington Global gives opportunities to people like him." Her words landed like a knife on the conference table. The room froze. Smiles turned cold in an instant. The guests murmured to one another, puzzled. Why would a major corporation ignore hierarchy and place a delivery man on equal footing in a multi-hundred-million-dollar negotiation? All eyes turned to Darius. He did not blink. His shoulders were square. Then, calmly, he replied, but not in English. He spoke in Arabic, steady and composed. "In my country, we believe that wisdom can come from anywhere. Sometimes, the ones who seem the smallest carry within them the greatest truths." The head of the Middle Eastern delegation paused, then gave a faint nod, but the atmosphere remained tense. Charles frowned, while Victoria smiled with satisfaction. The meeting had to be paused for a short break. Darius stepped into the hallway, heart racing, but his face unreadable. In that moment, memories came flooding back. 3 quiet years working night shifts, witnessing so much yet never speaking out. He had seen Victoria conceal loss reports, take envelopes from contractors, even delete black candidates' applications simply because they did not match the company image. Darius had stayed silent, but he was not naive. He had saved emails, copied files, recorded conversations. The evidence was safely stored on his hard drive, waiting for the right moment to come to light. And now, with Charles's career on the brink, and his own dignity trampled in front of everyone, Darius understood that moment had come. He clenched his fists, his eyes lit with a different kind of resolve. This time, he would not only save the deal, he would expose the truth, every last piece of it, and put an end to the cycle of injustice that had weighed on him for years. The next day, the entire board of directors was called into an emergency meeting, not just Harrington Global's leadership, but also the Middle Eastern delegation. The air was heavy. Everyone sensed this was going to be a turning point. Victoria opened the meeting with a confident tone. She stood up, adjusted her elegant blazer, and spoke with a sweet yet sharp voice. "Ladies and gentlemen, what happened yesterday was simply an unfortunate misunderstanding, but delivery man sitting beside the executive team was actually just a failed PR stunt. I take full responsibility on behalf of the company." Many eyes turned to Charles. He sat in silence, his face tense. Darius stood at the back of the room, quiet, but within moments, he stepped forward, holding his laptop, dressed sharply, no longer the quiet, invisible figure of yesterday. He opened the screen, his voice clear and firm. "Before we talk about responsibility, maybe we should take a look at the facts." A series of emails appeared, Victoria negotiating with contractors, agreeing to commissions in exchange for preferential contracts. Then came doctored financial reports, cleverly masking tens of millions in losses to appear as fake profits. Finally, an audio recording played, Victoria's voice cold and clear. "Black people never belong in this boardroom." The room went dead silent. Charles sat in shock, The Middle Eastern guests looked at one another, eyes filled with anger and disappointment. Victoria turned pale, scrambling to defend herself. "This is fake. He made it all up." But Darius was ready. He displayed verified server records, transfer logs, audio timestamps, everything legal, everything undeniable. Charles slammed his hand on the table, his face flushed red, his voice trembling with rage. "Victoria, you betrayed this company, and you betrayed me." The head of the Middle Eastern delegation stood up, walked slowly toward Darius. He spoke in Arabic, then turned to the room and said in clear English, "We want to sign with a corporation that respects culture and fairness. And we believe Mr. Darius is that bridge." Applause broke out, scattered at first, then rising in waves. Victoria collapsed. She was fired on the spot. The documents were turned over to the authorities. Stunned, the board had no other choice. Charles made the announcement, his voice heavy but resolute. "From today onward, Darius Brown will serve as Director of International Relations." The once invisible delivery man now stood tall in the center of power. 6 months later, Harrington Global's headquarters looked entirely different. In financial reports, the name that kept coming up was no longer Charles Harrington, but Darius Brown, the new Director of International Relations. Under his leadership, the company secured more major deals with Middle Eastern corporations. Revenue soared, crossing the $600 million mark in just half a year. In the media, people now referred to him with admiration, the delivery guy who became a global strategist. But Darius did not stop at fame or fortune. He donated part of his salary and bonuses to establish the Bridge of Hope Fund, supporting black students with dreams of studying international trade. The first scholarships had been awarded, and the image of those young people holding their ticket to the world became his greatest source of pride. His mother received full treatment. Her health was steadily improving. The once struggling home was now filled with laughter again. As for Victoria Blake, the one who once looked down on him, she was blacklisted in the financial industry. No company would dare hire her. The doors that had once opened wide were now slammed shut forever. Darius stepped out onto the balcony of the 50th floor, the very place where he had once stood trembling. Speaking up for the first time, the city below sparkled with light. He smiled, not for victory, but because justice had finally found its place. And the story ends with a message. Never underestimate someone just because of the job they do. Knowledge and dignity may be overlooked, but when the moment comes, they can change the world. If you believe that justice and fairness always matter, hit that subscribe button. We will keep bringing you inspiring stories of ordinary people who dared to rise and change their destiny.